Patrick, can we have another hand for them? They did tremendous. Welcome, my students, to our review. This is, to me, always been one of the best classes around. In fact, when I was in law school, it was like the only class I ever attended. So Tom does a tremendous review, and you can really pick up a great deal on the Gospel of Mark just with this one session. Would like to just say thank you so much to the people at Grace School. If we start trying to thank everybody that from Grace Church and Grace School who have contributed to us here, who have made things life so much easier for us, it would be just about impossible. But to name them all. But I would like to say a particular thanks to the maintenance crew who really, without them, this would not be possible. That's Mr. Ron Russell, and then his crew, Steve, Sandra, Mike. They're just unbelievable. Miss Danita Sailors, who's also head of the media department out here, fantastic. And certainly Greg Brandenburg, who is head of the computer department. Again, we would not be up were it not for those people. And so we wish them a very Merry Christmas. We give them our thanks and our blessings, and pray that they have a tremendous Christmas. And without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce Dr. Tom McCall here for his review of Mark. Thank you.
We certainly thank our executive producer, Grady Baskin Jr., and for all the work he and his crew, Mark Doolin, and we appreciate Bob Doolin, the wonderful music that he and his people have provided. By the way, he and his harpists are going to be with our Sunday morning class and Monday noon class, not this coming week, but the following week, the 13th, 12th and 13th of December. So we invite all of our web students and our local students to come and be with us on those occasions. May have a little trouble making it over from Sweden or Japan, but we'd love for you to do so. We have been studying the Gospel according to Mark, and that has been the subject of our course this fall semester. And tonight is the final class, which is actually a review of the entire book of Mark, the shortest gospel. And then following that, we will have a test. And we'll have a test taken here locally. And we invite those of you who are in Webland to participate with us in our test as well. And at the appropriate time, we will have the test available to you on the website. All right. And how do they get that?
There's a link on the top of the home page.
A link on the top of the home page, not the
the video page.
Video page, but you go back to the www.schooloftyrannus.net, and you get to it that way, and get the exam, and then take it with us same time that our local class is taking it. But for the review first, can you hear me? Is this on? Okay. All right. In our introduction, we talked about the person Mark, John Mark, and where he was from, and some of the vicissitudes of his life experiences. Does anybody remember how Mark introduces himself to us anonymously in his gospel in a very ignominious way?
And there was a young lad
What?
who slipped his coat and so forth.
Yes. And what occasion was that?
When Jesus was arrested in the garden.
In the arrest in the Garden of Gethsemane, and there was John Mark. He doesn't mention his name, but he says there was this young man, and all he had on was a sheet that was covering him up, or some have said a nightshirt, or whatever it was, very loose. And when he got there, the temple police had already arrested Jesus, and they saw this young man and tried to arrest him too, thinking he was one of them. And after all the disciples had scattered, just as Jesus said that they would, smite the shepherd, and the sheep will scatter. They had scattered, and here was John Mark anonymously there, and they tried to grab him, and all they could get hold of was this sheep, and he ran off across the Kidron Valley and into the streets of Jerusalem naked, he says. What an embarrassing situation. And this is how he introduces himself, very modestly, very with a lot, I think, a lot of self-deprecating humor. He introduces himself to us as the boy that ran away naked when the Lord was arrested. And then later on we get his path crosses the Apostle Paul and the Barnabas, who was Paul's associate in the missionary work. And what was his connection? What was Mark's connection to Paul and Barnabas? It's Barnabas' nephew. And so when Paul and Barnabas were anointed, designated from the church in Antioch to go on the first missionary journey, Barnabas wanted to bring his nephew Mark with him. So that was fine. So they headed out. And then what happened? They evangelized Cyprus, the island of Cyprus, went on to what is now Turkey, Anatolia. And what happened? Mark went home. And Paul thought that was desertion. He was deserting them. You know, he was a big help to them. He was able to probably carry stuff and help them along. And he went home, went back to Jerusalem. And no explanation is given as to why he did, but he did. And that made Paul quite angry. So on the next missionary trip, Barnabas wanted to take Mark along again. And what did Paul say? No way, Jose. You're not going to take that guy along. He's a deserter. He'll leave you in the lurch. We are not going to take him. And Paul and Barnabas had a really bad argument over it. And so much so that they split. This is the first record of a split in a Christian association because of personality differences. And it's not the last one. And so Barnabas and Mark went their way, and Paul and a new associate, Silas, went their way. And Mark was right in the middle of the whole issue. But that is about all we know about Mark, except that he appears later on as Paul's friend, helper. They reconcile, and toward the latter part of Paul's life. And that's what we know of Mark. And yet the Lord is pleased to use him, probably an associate of Peter in the latter days too, and gets much of his material from the Apostle Peter. Well, Mark opens his gospel not with the birth of Jesus, not with the early years of Jesus, but with what? John the Baptist, right off the out of the chute. And John is proclaiming a message, introduces Jesus, who is baptized by John, and Jesus begins to preach a message. And what is the basic thought of that message that both John and Jesus preached?
Repent.
Repentance and what?
The kingdom is at hand.
The kingdom of heaven is at hand. Here it is. The king is here. John was saying the king is coming. He's right, almost here. Jesus is saying, king is here. The kingdom of heaven is here. It's available. The king is available. And that was the message. All that the prophets had spoken of is coming to a head here. And the kingdom of heaven was available to Israel, and through Israel to the world. All Israel had to do was nationally to elect Jesus as King, Messiah, Redeemer. And the motion would be set in process for the establishment of the Messianic kingdom. This would not mean that the cross would be avoided, but that the kingdom would be established immediately afterwards. That was the option. That was a possibility. And that was what was offered to Israel. But it didn't take long for it to become clear that the nation was not going to receive him. A minority did, and was, and rejoiced in him. And there was thousands upon thousands upon thousands of Jews that received Jesus gladly. His teaching, his prophecies, his ministry, his healings. But the majority and the leadership did not. Now, as we get into the second and third chapters, we see that the Lord is doing things. He was performing certain miracles. He healed the paralytic that was lowered down through the roof, and forgave his sins. Then, shortly after that, they were in Capernaum, Jesus' headquarters city on the northwestern shore of the Sea of Galilee. And on the Sabbath morning, Saturday morning, they went out, he and his disciples, and were eating wheat that they were pulling off the stalks in the field. And the Pharisees were watching them with a careful eye, and they came out to him and said, "That is against the law. The law says you're not to work on the Sabbath." And he says, "Don't you remember David, King David, when he was hungry with his followers, they went to the temple and they ate the showbread that was lawful only for the priests?" And he said that the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. Now, what was Jesus proving to the leadership of Israel by these episodes? What was the main thing he was endeavoring to get across when he forgave the paralytic's sin and said he was the Lord of the Sabbath. What was he proving? What was the point he was getting across?
His divinity.
His divinity. His deity. That he is God manifest in the flesh. Only God can forgive sins. Only God is the Lord of the Sabbath. To make such claims were unheard of in Israel, unless they were claims from deity. And here was deity manifest in the flesh. Then he began to teach. After the leadership had said, well, he's not who he says he is. He's a deceiver. In fact, the miracles that you see him perform are performed by what power? The power of Satan. Beelzebub. So they not only rejected his ministry as from God, but they said whatever he's doing from Satan. So it was a clear indication of the rejection by the leadership of the nation. So he began to teach in parables. And the first parable was about dirt. And he describes 4 kinds of dirt. Soils, which were approached by the seed. And then he said that the seed represents the Word of God, and the 4 soils represent the responses of people, or the 4 kinds of people that are exposed to the Word of God and the gospel of Christ. And he indicates by that this is a new age. This is a mystery of the kingdom. This is not the kingdom that was prophesied by the Old Testament prophets, nor is it the kingdom offered to Israel at the beginning. That has been rejected and therefore has been postponed. But there is a mystery of the kingdom that is going to take place between the 2 comings of Messiah. And during that time, the seed of the Word is going to be spread in the world, and 4 kinds of soil are going to be exposed to the seed. What are the 4 kinds of soils? What are the 4 kinds of people?
The paths.
The what?
The paths, the
Beaten
soil.
down paths, hard soil, and
They don't receive it at all. Birds come by and
nothing gets. It never penetrates the earth. The seed never gets into the hard packed paths, stony ground.
They grow in there.
And before it can even be absorbed, the birds come along representing Satan and take it out, take it away. What else? What's the second kind? Rocky soil. That's it. Rocky soil. That again, it's somewhat similar. It just never has a chance to get absorbed.
germinates, but can't stand the heat.
You can't even. A little sprout will come out and then it just fades away. Nothing solid there as far as production growth. And then the third kind.
Thorny soil.
Weeds.
Thorny.
It's thorny. It gets into the soil a little bit and then starts growing up, but the thorns choke. And Jesus says this represents what kind of people?
People who let the concerns of the world,
The cares of the world, and they're gone. Persecution, they're gone. And fade away. And then there's the fourth kind that is productive and sprouts and produces fruit. But not everybody produces the same volume of fruit. says 30, some 60, some 100-fold. But everybody produces fruit that is productive, that is good soil. So he says there's 4 kinds of soil, and only one of them is any good as far as the Lord's concerned, and is receptive, and is warm, and is open, and is usable by the Lord. What a different kind of kingdom, a mystery of the kingdom here. Then Jesus goes to Nazareth, his hometown, and they have a ticker tape parade for him there. What happens in Nazareth, his hometown?
They kick him out.
Yeah, they don't like him. And what do they say about it? Why, we know who this is. This is that boy who grew up here, that son of Mary. Don't say the son of Joseph. That carpenter, we know him. He's nothing special. And there was no faith in Nazareth. So he was unable to do the miracles that he did in Capernaum. Why?
Because of their lack of faith.
Lack of faith. They didn't believe. He did 1 or 2 healings. That was about it. And he left his hometown. Said a prophet has no honor in his own country. Well, then he goes back to the Sea of Galilee area, and he does some tremendous miracles close by the Sea of Galilee at 2 different times. He had 2 great feedings. Feedings. We know something about feedings, don't we? We had a wonderful meal today. It seems like everywhere you were around in Jesus' ministry, there was a meal going on, and often a grand feast with great teaching and with real blessing. Well, what were these feedings? Who were these feedings of?
The followers.
The what?
The followers. The people.
How many thousand?
5,000.
5,000 first time.
4,000
Then he pulled back a little bit, and how many? 4,000 the next time. Separated by a period of time. And this was for the benefit of the people, to be sure, so that, they were out there in a rather remote place, and they'd been with Jesus for some time in both instances. And the Lord had compassion on the multitude and fed them. Out of nothing, as it were. 5 loaves and 2 fish, but he makes a meal out of that for 5,000. And then out of almost the same amount for 4,000. How can he do this? Well, he's the creator. And this was disciples as well as care for the multitudes. And what was the great teaching he was trying to get across to his disciples? And he was disappointed that they weren't getting the point. Yes.
That he was God?
That he is God. That's what he was showing earlier to the Pharisees and the scribes as well as the disciples. They hadn't gotten it. This is what he was showing to the disciples. And they hadn't gotten it. He says they did not understand. And the thing that they did not understand was his deity. Got to admit, it's an amazing idea that God could be manifest in the flesh. that such a thing as the incarnation could take place. That's what he was teaching them. The same thing when he was there in the boat afterwards. And this great storm came up and he was sleeping. And they were scared to death. The water was coming into the boat. It was rough. It was a perfect storm out there, about to engulf the boat and them. And they would die, drown. And he didn't care. He was sleeping. He goes back to the boat. They go back to the boat and wake him up and say, don't you care what's happening to us? And he gets up. He rebukes the storm and he tells the sea, peace, be still. And everything is calm, quiet, like there'd never been a ripple on the water. What was he teaching them? He is no mere man. He is man, but he is no mere man. He is God. He created the winds, the sea, the fish, the bread. He has control over it. Then we come to the pivotal point in the Gospel of Mark. When he takes them later to Caesarea Philippi in the far north of Israel, and he challenges them with a question. Who do men say that I am? And how do they respond?
A prophet, Elijah,
John the Baptist.
Yeah. Which, high honors. Good crowd to be in. Notice what he was teaching? The main thing he wanted them to understand is who I am. Who am I? Do you know? Have you realized? Have you understood yet? And have the people understood? Who do they say that I am? And what does the word I am mean anyway?
that's God's name.
That's the divine term. I am who I am. That's how Moses introduced himself. God introduced himself to Moses. I am who I am. What do the people say? That then he says, who do you say that I am? You have been with me. You have had over 3 years of instruction from me. You have observed everything that I have done, all of my miracles. Who do you say that I am? Have you got the picture yet? Peter, the spokesman, responded with all of his impulsiveness, and this time he really got it right, and he said, what did he say?
You're the Christ.
You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. That was it. That's what he wanted them to understand. And it wasn't because he had kept drumming it into their heads, I am the Christ, I am the Christ, I am the Christ. No, he was very reticent about saying that himself. It was by what he said, by what he did, how he taught, and the miracles that he performed, and all of the other things combined that persuaded them that he was the Christ. And in Matthew it says, flesh and blood has not revealed this unto you. No man has told you this. No man has revealed it to you. It is not possible to get it through human disclosure. My Father has revealed it to you. So, this is the pivotal point in Mark. And from this point on, he has no longer demonstrated his messiahship and deity to them. but he is unfolding his sacrificial ministry, his atonement work. And the next big episode, they go up on a high mountain. He, not all the 12, just 3, Peter, James, and John. And what in the world happens on that mountain?
Transfiguration.
The Transfiguration. He is transformed. He is morphed before them. And his clothing becomes so white that they can't hardly look at it. And his face becomes shining like the sun. They've never seen Jesus like this. This is the new Jesus that they are seeing. What is this? And this is his deity shining forth that has been so veiled and covered up to this point throughout his 30-some odd years of life on the planet. And his deity is allowed to shine in a way that they had never seen before. And he said that they would experience the kingdom before they died. Some of you, he said. And these were the men, James, John, Peter, who saw him in his kingdom glory, as it were. And not him alone. 2 other men were with him. Moses and Elijah. And they were representing everything about the kingdom, the law and the prophets, Israel, the remnant, saved and blessed. And this was a preview of the Messianic kingdom that would come. And what did they speak to Jesus about? We're not told in Mark, but in the parallel passages, we're told that there was a particular subject that they had. And they were discussing with him.
His upcoming
Who
death.
was going
His
to
death.
decide?
They were talking about his death. Yes. And the implication is that they were there to comfort him and encourage him and to solace with him this great death that he must face, the sacrificial death, the thing that Moses and the prophets had looked forward to as the means of their redemption for all those centuries. Now it was upon them. They were just a matter of weeks away from it being fulfilled. So, what a great experience and a pivotal point, an important point in the Gospel of Mark. Then they have a discussion as they go down the mountain and then they head back toward Jerusalem. And you get the picture that Jesus is a little ways out front and the disciples have lingered back just a little bit and they're having a heated discussion. And is it the same discussion that Moses and Elijah had about his death and what they might do and how they might be prepared for such an event? Is that what they were arguing about?
No.
No. What?
Who's the greatest?
Who's going to be the greatest? Now, the greatest when and where?
In the kingdom.
In the kingdom. So were these men of faith? Yeah. They believed in Jesus and they believed that he was a king and they believed in his kingdom. Part. They weren't excited about that. And they turned a deaf ear, as it were, to anything that he taught about his death. But they wanted to know, who was going to have the top cabinet positions in Jesus' kingdom? Who was going to be the prime minister? Who was going to be the secretary of state? Noble ambitions. He doesn't rebuke them for wanting to have a high position in his kingdom. What does he rebuke them for? He tells them that. How does he tell them they're going to get such positions?
By being a servant of all.
By being a servant to all. That's the way you get high up in the Lord's kingdom. Worthy ambition. But to get there, you don't get there like the Gentiles get there in their administrations. It's by being a servant to all. Then he gets up to Jerusalem, and he is about to enter the city. Now, they had entered the city of Jerusalem on numerous occasions for the various feasts, and he'd been with his disciples, and they had an entourage from time to time, and he would stay with his friends Lazarus and Mary and Martha, and they would join the great throngs going into Jerusalem as they had in the past. But now there was something different. He's going to enter Jerusalem in a different way. How does he decide to enter Jerusalem this time? On a donkey. And he's got things set up. And there's a donkey prepared for him, waiting for him, that had never been ridden before. And he gets on the donkey and starts riding the donkey into Jerusalem. And why in the world would he do such a thing that he'd never done before?
Fulfillment of prophecy.
Prophecy. And what was the prophecy?
The king will come to...
That the king would come to Jerusalem riding on a donkey. Lo, having salvation. Completely different. It's in the same chapter as Zechariah 9. The first part of Zechariah 9 speaks of a great earthly ruler that would come forth on a horse and would conquer and lay waste great, vast sections of the world. Who was that ruler? In Zechariah 9, early.
Alexander.
Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, prophesied in Zechariah as well as Daniel, but Zechariah. And how he would come forth as a mighty conqueror and so forth. And then, in that very context, he says, "Rejoice, O Jerusalem, the daughter of Jerusalem. Your king comes unto you, lowly, riding upon a donkey." What a contrast between Alexander the Great and Jesus riding upon the donkey. Alexander the Great on his great black steed Bucephalus, with vast armies conquering the world. Jesus riding upon the donkey, lowly, but receiving the hosannas of the remnant of Israel. Blessed art thou who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna, so forth. So that was the response of his followers. They believed in him. They welcomed him. They received him. Thousands and thousands of them. Sad to say, the majority did not know him. He came into his own, and his own received him not. He was in the world, and the world was made by him. But the world did not know him either. Well, he's in Jerusalem now. He comes to the temple, and he presents himself in the temple, and he speaks to the priests and the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And various groups come to him trying to trick him and to trap him so that they might arrest him. But he refuses to be the trappee. He cannot be trapped in anything that he says or in any answer that he gives them. The Sadducees, who did not believe in life after death or the resurrection, tried to trip him up with this fanciful story about the woman who had 7 brothers successively as husbands. And he says, you don't know the Scriptures nor the power of God. And how did he prove to the Sadducees that there was life after death? Because all they believed were the first 5 books of Moses. And how did he prove to them from the 5 books of Moses that there was life after death?
He said that God was the God of Moses and God of the living, not of the dead.
And who did God say that he was to Moses?
I'm the God of Abraham.
Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, who had been dead for hundreds of years. God is the God of the living, not of the dead. So, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were still alive when Moses was alive. They were alive after death. The Pharisees. In this case, Jesus was the one who asked the question. He'd been answering questions all along. Now he asked the question. And he asked them a question about David's son. How do they say that the Messiah, the Christ, is David's son? And he asks, why then does David then call him, Christ, Lord? If Christ is just David's son, and that's all he is, why does David call him Lord? And he quotes from Psalm 110, the Lord said unto my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemy your footstool. The Lord said unto my David's Lord. Does David have 2 lords? Yahweh says to David's Lord, who is this second David's Lord? The Messiah. The Father says to the Son, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. So David's son is David's son. But he's not only David's son, he is God's son. That is the point that he wanted the Pharisees to understand. And that he, God's son and David's son, was standing before them at that moment. Well, then Jesus takes his disciples up to the Mount of Olives and looks over the temple, and he delivers what is called the Mount of Olives Discourse, or the Olivet Discourse. And there's a great prophetic section in Mark and in the other Gospels, the other Synoptic Gospels. What will happen to the generation of Israel that sees the second coming of Christ? Is it going to be a happy time leading up to that event? What's it going to be like? What are the pivotal aspects of the time before the second coming of Christ?
Tribulation.
Tribulation. Time of Jacob's troubles.
It's time of Jacob's trouble. And
Great
what?
tribulation.
70th week of David.
70th week of Daniel. What is one of the main things that he warns them about that's going to happen?
Abomination of desolation.
The abomination of desolation. What a horrible thing. And that's going to be standing where it should not. And Matthew quotes Jesus as saying it will be standing in the holy place. The abomination of desolation. Ew. And what is that? What's the abomination of desolation?
The Antichrist.
The Antichrist, the false Messiah, is going to commit the abomination of desolation in the holy place of the temple. And when you see that, he says, get out of Dodge, or Jerusalem. Get out of Jerusalem. Flee to the mountains.
Don't bother getting extra cloak or anything.
Yeah. and because it's going to come a time, the great tribulation, such as the world has never seen before, unto that point, or never will again. What terrible, terrible plagues will be put down upon the world. What persecution will be erupt from the Antichrist to Israel, and so forth. So they're not happy days leading up to the second coming of Christ. They're the time of Jacob's trouble, the beginning of sorrows, and the end of sorrows also. But then the second coming of Christ, and Israel will be gathered, saved, and redeemed, and the world will participate in the blessings of the kingdom of Christ upon the earth. The day of Passover draws near. And Jesus gathers his disciples on Passover Eve. And they participate in the Passover feast. And Jesus observes the feast, but out of the feast he teaches them several great truths. And two of them have been immortalized and institutionalized before the church and through the church. And what did he teach out of the Passover feast concerning himself? From the foods that he ate with them.
He was going to die and his blood shed.
The body, the unleavened bread that was broken for them, and the blood that he would shed the next day as a covenant, the new covenant between him and his people Israel and those who are redeemed. After the Passover feast, he takes them out of the city of Jerusalem across the Kidron Valley to a garden called the Garden of Gethsemane, the olive oil vat. And he prays. And he asks them to watch with him. And he is very, very, very anguished. Well, we don't read about him ever being anguished before to this extent. And he is anguished to the point of death. And he sweats drops of blood and he prays. And what does he pray?
Take this cup from me.
Yeah. If it be possible, take this cup from me. Which cup?
Death.
Cup of death.
The cup of his death, the cross. And was it the physical anguish that he was about to endure? Partly. But what else? Separation from God. And how could he who has known only the fellowship of the Father throughout eternity and for his earthly life, how can he be separated from God? His sin will be put upon him. He who knew no sin became sin for us. And that was the anguish of his cry in Gethsemane. And they didn't understand it. They couldn't stay away. It was Near 3 o'clock in the morning. They had the feast until midnight, as custom is. And it was wee hours of the morning, and they were sleepy. They couldn't wait with him in his anguish. Then he is arrested by the treachery of his own disciple, Judas, who kissed him. And he's dragged before the Sanhedrin, the priests. And what crime is he charged with?
Blasphemy.
Blasphemy. They tried other things, couldn't get agreement, and finally they asked him, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the living God?" It was the right question asked by the right person at the right time of the right person, in the right place. Jesus said, "I am. You will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven, and he will judge you." On that occasion is the meeting. You are judging me now. You are going to be judged. And they sentenced him to death for his blasphemy. He has claimed to be the Messiah, the Son of God. Then they brought him before Pilate, because they were not allowed at that time to carry out the sentence of capital punishment. So they were brought before Pilate. They brought him before Pilate. And this time they didn't accuse him of blaspheming the God of Israel. What did they accuse him of?
Treason.
Being a king, of sedition, of trying to take the place of Caesar. That's a charge that would sit in a Roman court. And so he was found guilty of being the king of the Jews. He was charged by Pilate. And he was laid in the tomb, buried, sealed. Friday evening before sunset, the stone was rolled over the grave. And he laid there that evening, that night, and all through the Sabbath. And the day after the Sabbath, the first day of the week, came to do what they could not do on Friday evening before the Sabbath. That was to anoint his body with the spices that was customary. When they got there, the stone was rolled away. And they went inside, and to their amazement, they didn't see Jesus, but they saw somebody. Who was it?
An angel.
An angel. They weren't expecting that. And what did he say to them?
He's not
He's
here.
not here, he is
He
risen.
is not here. He is risen. He's gone. And they didn't know what to think of such a thing. They were not prepared for such a thing. But with his various appearances to them, he demonstrated that he was indeed risen from the dead. And they saw him, and they witnessed to him throughout the world, and most of them became martyrs to his name and to the truth that he is risen from the dead. Well, that's pretty much the review, brief review of the Gospel of Mark.